buckle up and get ready. So we're going straight to the kickoff. UFC 249 in the building. No fans in the audience. We got UFC 249. The card was stacked. It was a very successful event with over 700,000 buys on ESPN Plus. Again, this is a very successful event for UFC. I know they had to delay it in April because of the COVID-19. Speaking of COVID-19, they had to delay it to this. Obviously, I'll get into the main card in a bit, but speaking of COVID-19, there was one fighter in the UFC that was supposed to fight this past weekend that tested positive for COVID-19, and that is Ronaldo Jacare Souza. And his two cornermen actually tested positive as well. So from an article, ESPN staff writer Brent Akamoto, it says UFC stated, as per UFC's health and safety protocol, all three men have left the host hotel and will be self-isolating off premises, where UFC medical team will monitor their conditions remotely and will provide assistance with any necessary treatment. So obviously this is good that they were able to catch this so it wouldn't spread. And obviously UFC knew the environment that we're in. That's why there was no fans in I think it was an arena that could sit about 15,000 people, according to Joe Rogan's podcast. But it was empty because of the current environment. But they also were testing all of the staff, the athletes, everyone that was going to be there. They were testing multiple times. And again, in this article, it said we administered 1,200 tests this week on 300 people. So that means they tested every person at least 4 times. And this is coming from UFC President Dana White. It's not unexpected one person would test positive. The system works. And what's good about this is now that we know Jacare tested positive, he's doing what he needs to do, and we're in a position to help him if he needs it. So kind of adding to that, Jacare was trying to be more proactive and knew that there was potentially a possibility that he would test positive for COVID-19. So he did inform UFC officials upon his arrival about a family member who might have been infected with the coronavirus. So he was trying to be upfront. Obviously, a lot of these fighters wanted to fight to get paid, but he was doing his part to say, hey, I'm just letting you know one of my family members is infected and tested positive for coronavirus. So again, hats off to the UFC for being able to catch this, as well as the 2 cornermen that he also had. So hopefully, or not hopefully, but it seems like, one of those 3 might have infected the other 2, but again, we'll never know. But as long as they were able to catch that, Jacare was taken off the card, obviously, because you can't have him fighting another fighter who tested negative. So hats off again to the UFC for being proactive and, making this, catching Jacare. But 1,200 tests, that's a lot of tests. So 300 people, again, 1,200 tests, 4 times, at least each person, I believe. So let's go ahead and get into the main card. I mean, again, for those of you that were able to watch this, UFC 249 on pay-per-view, ESPN Plus, I wasn't able to watch the full thing, and I hope to watch it this weekend. I was able to watch the highlights of a couple of these fights, especially the main event, but I will be sitting down this weekend to watch the whole thing once ESPN releases it basically for free this upcoming weekend. Usually with UFC and boxing, after a week after the pay-per-view, they show it for free. And obviously, the results, but still watching the fight, you'll be able to get, have a nice gauge. So maybe I might have more analysis next time on the next show next week. So bear with me. But on the main card, let's just start with the main card. To open up that main card, it was Greg Hardy versus Jorge de Castro, and Greg Hardy wins by decision. Greg Hardy has had a solid start to his MMA career, starting off 6-2-1. So the 1 is no contest, or 6-2, 1 no contest, and technically one of those losses was a disqualification. And the no contest was he won the fight, but later on they identified that he was using an inhaler in between rounds. Obviously, you can't be doing that in the UFC, so that was changed from a win to no contest. So, if you look at it, he would technically be 7-1, or 8-1 potentially. So a solid start for Greg Hardy's career. Again, he's on I believe this might be his first time on the actual main pay-per-view or main card for a pay-per-view event. So he's definitely moving up the ladder. Again, he's just been a solid fighter, obviously still novice in the sport, but he seems to be taking it seriously and, running with this opportunity. Obviously, we know some of his past, and, people deserve second chances. I'm not saying what he did is right, but you can see with his second chance, he's taking the opportunity and running with it and making the best of it. So, big credit to Greg Hardy. The next fight was Jeremy Stephens versus Calvin Kattar. This one, I like both of these fighters. Usually they are very active on their feet, and, no one wants to see a fight. Well, the main UFC fan base that, like jiu-jitsu and wrestling, they like to see that stuff. But, the average fan like me, I would say, likes to see more of like a stand-up fight. So Jeremy Stephens, Calvin Kattar, for the most part, it was likely to be on their feet. Calvin Kattar ended up winning by KO in the second round, and he's had a solid time in the UFC as well. A couple of his recent losses were to solid competitors. So Zabit, and I'm not even gonna butcher his last name. So Magomedov, and Renato Moicano. So both of those guys are actually pretty solid fighters. So no. And I remember watching the Moicano fight versus Kattar, and Moicano just destroyed his legs, and that was pretty impressive fight. But again, Calvin Kattar looks to be, picking up some steam, because Jeremy Stephens is a solid competitor and always seems to find himself on the main card when he fights. Because again, he's exciting and he's a good fighter, and a lot of the fans like to see him. So again, I'm excited to rewatch that fight this upcoming weekend. The next fight was basically like a commercial, because it was a 20-second fight. Obviously, for those of you that know Francis Ngannou, the absolute destroyer, he's like the, how do I say it? He's like the Deontay Wilder of the MMA or of UFC. So he has crazy one-punch knockout power, and ended up destroying. Rosen struck in 20 seconds, KO. So that got him performance of the night, as well as I think he deserves a title fight next. So I believe Stipe is the champion right now after he beat Daniel Cormier. So right now, Stipe, I believe, has an eye injury, so he's still unsure of where his status is as a fighter. But I believe, and I think Francis Ngannou already fought Stipe, lost. But after this, he's went on a tear. He deserves another chance to get that title fight. And if he doesn't want to do it, then, DC, if DC is up to fight Ngannou, which I don't think he should do, I think DC will retire. Then maybe Francis Ngannou, hopefully I want to see him versus Stipe again. I believe that'll be a good fight. So, man, Francis Ngannou that dude is jacked. Crazy power, puts people to sleep with one punch. So whenever you see him, make sure you guys do not blink, because the fight will be over before you know it. And again, this is heavyweight division, so you should expect knockouts. Next, Henry Cejudo versus Dominick Cruz. Henry Cejudo wins by KO in the second round over Dominick Cruz. I thought this one was going to be a little bit more competitive. Dominick Cruz, I was hoping that he would challenge Henry Cejudo a little bit more, but Henry Cejudo, again, veteran guy, very crafty, big-time wrestler, but also could strike as well, as we've seen with previous fights and how he became the champ. Henry Cejudo wins by KO in the second round, then retires after the fight. Now, Henry Cejudo, I want to see him fight Johnson again. I know Johnson got traded for Ben Askren, and obviously Ben Askren basically retired, and I believe Johnson's now fighting in one over there in Asia. So I don't know. Henry Cejudo could technically retire. He's beaten everybody that was in front of him. He split with Demetrius Johnson, but Henry Cejudo is definitely one of the best to ever do it. So you can't complain there. He's won 2 championships in the UFC, so he was the champ in 2 different weight classes, and was also a gold medalist in the Olympics. So big shout out to Henry Cejudo for going ahead and winning and then retiring when he decides to retire. Don't let the sport retire you. You retire from the sport. And then the main event, obviously everybody was watching or waiting for this. Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje. This was a crazy fight. I was able to watch the highlights of this fight because I wanted to provide a little bit more analysis on this fight. Man, Tony Ferguson, if you guys watch Tony Ferguson, definitely one of the toughest guys that is in the UFC. A lot of people like to call him crazy, and he does act a little weird, but Tony Ferguson, man, is tough as nails and very awkward fighter. So I was expecting him to beat Justin Gaethje, not like destroy him, but Justin Gaethje took a big shot in the second round, which looked like it was going to be over then. He got hit by an uppercut right at the end of the round. I think the end of the round saved him, because if it wasn't that, he might have gotten stopped if there was more time on the clock at the end of the second. But Justin Gaethje, as a true veteran does, as a true champion does, was able to shake that off and, keep his composure, pick his shots, be very selective. And he was tagging Tony Ferguson, whenever he wanted. And unfortunately for Tony Ferguson, this kind of throws him out of the fight for versus Khabib, which has been canceled basically 5 times. The fight is cursed, as I've said before. And this one earned fight of the night and got performance of the night for Justin Gaethje. So he got that nice little bonus. So what is next for each of those guys? So Justin Gaethje, obviously he's an interim champion. So you want to unify those belts. He's going to be going against Khabib next, hopefully. And then I think Khabib should have been stripped of the belt because of what happened with. He should have been fighting now, but for whatever reason, he decided to fly back to, I believe, Russia or wherever he's from during this pandemic and wasn't able to leave. So that's why they had to find a replacement. That's why Justin Gaethje was able to come in and take this fight on short notice. It was like 2-3 weeks notice. Then they extended it, so he got an additional month on top of that and was able to prepare for Tony Ferguson and came to fight. Tony Ferguson, not to provide excuses, but this guy has been training for a battle, on the floor, a grappler, because Khabib is a grappler. I'm assuming most of his camp was working on grappling, not striking. But again, not to provide excuses, Tony Ferguson just got beat. He got beat on his feet. He did hit Gaethje with some good shots. Again, in the second, hit him with the uppercut. That probably would have ended the fight had there been an additional 15 seconds on the clock. But again, he wasn't able to do that. So what's next for Tony Ferguson? For me, the only fight that makes sense for Tony Ferguson is I doubt Conor McGregor wants that fight, so that's not going to happen. But Tony Ferguson, I see him, I think it would make sense to have him fight Dustin Poirier to face the winner of Gaethje Khabib. I think that would be the fight to make, is Tony Ferguson versus Dustin Poirier. Dustin the Diamond Poirier. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that last name right. But again, this is a great card. I'm very happy. I'm a huge UFC fan. I try to learn the sport as much as I can. But I like watching the fights, and again, I appreciate Dana for getting this together. Dana and ESPN for putting this together for the fans and providing entertainment over the weekend. So that is all the UFC talk we're going to be doing today.